Hello YouTube, and welcome back to the Card Combo Show, episode 39, with me, Chocobo, where we look at the weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG. Make sure to like and subscribe, it makes a big difference. Right, this week I'm going to be looking at Chocobo from Opus 12, Scarmiglione, or Scarmiglione, or however you want to pronounce it, from Opus 3, Akstar from Opus 13, Zidane from Opus 6, and finally Zemus from Opus 5. Right, first and foremost, Chocobo, or Chocobo, Chocobo. I say chocolate, and their name is derived from chocolate, so maybe it's Chocobo, but I prefer to say Chocobo, so deal with it. It's a 2 CP backup with the text, when a Chocobo enters the field, the forwards you control can form a party with forwards of any element this turn, with a dull ability of the same. So it's a pretty decent ability in my opinion. So forming a party would be Heretical Knight Garland and Palom. So you can have Heretical Knight's ability where you have to pay 2 earth and 4 colourless, and Heretical Knight Garland will gain the text, when Heretical Knight Garland attacks, it deals 6,000 damage to all the forwards your opponent controls. If he party attacks with Palom, Palom will also deal 2,000 damage to a forward your opponent controls. When Palom deals damage to your opponent, or when the forward damaged by Palom is put from the field to the break zone, during the same turn you may put Palom into the break zone. If you do so, search for one card named Palom and play it onto the field. That was a mouthful. But basically what this means is that you can have it so that these two attack together. You deal 6k to the board, and then Palom can deal a further 2k to something, at which point an 8k forward would die. You could technically do it the other way around, so Palom deals 2k to something, maybe just a 4k forward, and then Heretical Knight Garland will finish it off. At which point you can put Palom into the break zone to bring in another Palom, say the likes of this guy, and when he enters the field other than from your hand, choose one forward, you may deal 7,000 damage. So that would then mean that you have dealt 8k to one forward, and then a total of 13 to another forward, so you're hopefully breaking 2 forwards, and you still have the Heretical Knight Garland attack on the stack. You can also choose this Palom as well, as the first Palom simply states search for one card name Palom and play it onto the field, so it can also be the backup one as well. If you're running that many Paloms, probably not the best idea, but you know, maybe if you want some more backup consistency, then go for it. Then you've got Kefka and Shock Trooper. So when Kefka attacks, choose one forward you control and one forward your opponent controls. Break them. When a character your opponent controls put from the field into the break zone, you may pay 1 colourless, and when you do so, draw 1 card. And then Shock Trooper, when Shock Trooper attacks, choose one forward your opponent controls, break it, and break Shock Trooper. So what you can do is, with these two, attack as a party, obviously, and then you can choose 2 different forwards your opponent controls. And then with Kefka's ability, you choose Shock Trooper. It comes to resolution, and Shock Trooper is being put into the break zone. It doesn't matter about their text, because Shock Trooper has been chosen already, and Shock Trooper's actual own text doesn't have to choose himself anyway. But either way, the attacks happen, resolution, Shock Trooper is put into the break zone, and 2 of your opponent's forwards are put into the break zone, and you can pay 1 CP for each of your opponent's forwards to then gain a card to hand. Len and Yuna. So when Len forms a party with card name Yuna and attacks, you may search for one summon and cast it without paying the cost. If you do not cast it, put the summon in the break zone. If you cast a summon of cost 5 or more with this ability, put Len into the break zone. And obviously with Yuna's S ability double cast, when you cast a summon this turn, you may cast one summon from your hand with a cost inferior to that of the summon cast without paying its cost. So what you could do is, with these two, party attack, and then you could cast something like Raiden, which is a 9 CP summon, to remove one of your opponent's forwards and break another. You could then simply pay for Yuna's double cast S to then cast something, and any other summon, because, well, not any other summon, but pretty much any other summon, because most summons are under 9 CP in cost. At which point you can cast something quite significant again. Could be something like Phoenix, where you get to deal 8k to something and bring a forward of 3 CP or less from your field into the break zone dull. So, you know, that's pretty good. Now that obviously will make Len go into the break zone. However, as these two have party attacks, Yuna's attack will still be on the stack, and you will have hopefully gotten rid of at least 2 of your opponent's forwards. But there's loads of different things you can do with this, obviously. There's, I mean, any summon, literally any summon with a party attack of Len and Yuna, you can cast anything you want to. Noctis and Gilgamesh 11. So when Noctis enters the field, choose one category for 15 forward other than card in Noctis in the break zone, add to hand, don't care about that. When Noctis forms a party and attacks, until the end of the turn, all the forwards you control gain plus 2,000 power and haste. And then when Gilgamesh 11 attacks, choose one forward of cost 2 or less in your break zone, play it onto the field. So if these two were to attack, and actually before I get to that, we are talking about 4 separate elements here, because obviously Chocobo is wind, Noctis is earth and lightning, and Gilgamesh is water. But it's not unheard of in many multi-element decks now to have this sort of thing happen, and there's plenty of ways to be able to cheat something like Noctis onto the field anyway. But yeah, anyway. If you were to have Noctis and Gilgamesh 11 party attack, obviously Gilgamesh's and Noctis's ability would stack, but what you would do is you would have it so Noctis stacks first, and then Gilgamesh. So Gilgamesh will resolve and bring a 2 CP forward from the break zone onto the field, at which point Noctis then resolves, and he will give that 2 CP forward haste and plus 2000 power, and obviously most 2 CP forwards are fairly small, so power buff will be nice, and it can then attack as well. Gipple and Sabin, so the forwards forming a party you control gain Brave, and a party you control attacks. All the forwards in the party gain 5000 power until the end of the turn, and then at damage 5, Sabin attacks, choose one forward depending on controls, deal damage equal to Sabin's power. So again, you would have to stack this in the correct order. For your attack, Gipple's ability, you'd want to stack second, sorry, so you go Sabin and then Gipple. You then have Gipple resolve, Sabin goes to plus 12, and then obviously Sabin's brave as well, so he then attacks, and again at damage 5 still, you will deal 12,000 damage to something, and you know, him being a 12k forward is pretty substantial as well. Gilgamesh. Now this would require you to have a singular Gilgamesh in the break zone, or some way of buffing Gilgamesh just statically by 1000, but when if Gilgamesh has 10,000 power or more, Gilgamesh gains Brave and can attack twice in the same turn. So you can have Gipple and Gilgamesh attack as a party, at which point Gilgamesh gains plus 5000 power. Provided he is at 10k power, he can then attack a second time as well. Scarmiglione. So when Scarmiglione enters the field from the break zone, choose one forward, deal damage equal to half of Scarmiglione's power, round up to the nearest 1000, and then he has the S ability Living Dead. When Scarmiglione is put from the field into the break zone during this turn, return Scarmiglione to the field, against plus 2000 power until the end of the turn. So if you were simply to block with Scarmiglione and use its S ability, it means that when he re-enters, he would deal 4000 damage to something. So if he blocked something that was 10,000 power, he could still kill it. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but there's probably just better Scarmigliones out there. But there are ways to make it more interesting. So let's say you use something like Jake. So you could have it so that Scarmiglione leaves the field, comes back in with his S ability, he will become an 8k, but then obviously Jake can give him a plus 4000 power when he enters, at which point he will then become a 12k. Half of 12k is 6, and you know, that's probably not enough to kill a lot of forwards, but it's a bigger range to be able to kill things with. And ultimately, if you've got other means of creating a static buff as well, that's a great way to be able to deal more damage. So if you had something like Rydia, the category 4 forwards other than Rydia you control gain plus 1000 power and Brave. So Scarmiglione would enter, and he would actually be with Jake on the field, and using his S ability, he would come in as a 13 CP. Now it does say to round up, because half of 13 is 6.5, so you would deal 7k to something, which is much more in the range of being able to kill things. Magissa, so search for... Pay 0, search for a fire forward across 3 or less, play it onto the field. You can only use the ability if Magissa has received 4000 damage or more, and only once per turn. So what you could do is block with Scarmiglione, or have Scarmiglione kick the bucket somehow, and then use his S ability. He re-enters the field at 8k, which means he will deal 4k to Magissa, because he simply states when Scarmiglione enters the field from the break zone, choose one forward. So it's just choose one forward, so you can choose your Magissa. Magissa takes 4000 damage, at which point you can go search something and play it onto the field, and it's simply a fire forward across 3, so you know, obviously Forza's up there, you can also go for VV as well. Either way, the chances are that the forward Magissa will be searching and playing onto the field will be dealing more damage than Scarmiglione would from entering the field. Baigan. This is a bit of a weird one. If Baigan is dealt 3000 damage or less, the damage becomes 0 instead. And when Baigan is dealt 4000 damage or more, you may put Baigan into the break zone. When you do so, it deals 7000 damage to all the forwards opponent controls. So obviously Scarmiglione could block, or again, make Scarmiglione kick the bucket somehow. Use his S ability, comes back onto the field, you deal Baigan 4000 damage, at which point you will then deal, or if you put Baigan into the break zone, deal 7k damage to your opponent's board. Hooded Man. So obviously Hooded Man and Kane cannot be played on the field at the same time. And when Hooded Man enters the field, choose one category 4 forward other than the card named Hooded Man in your break zone, add it to your hand. So it's a good way to be able to recur Scarmiglione or Scarmiglione's S fodder, and then at the end of each of your turns, activate all the category 4 forwards you control. So if you already have Scarmiglione on the field, but there's one in the break zone, you play Hooded Man, that gets Scarmiglione back to your hand, and then reactivate Scarmiglione on the field at the end of your turn. Akstar. So he's a 4 CP 8k legend fire. When Akstar enters the field, choose one card with EX Burst in your damage zone. You may trigger its EX Burst. This effect is put on the stack. And then damage 3, when Akstar enters the field, you may search one category FFB character other than the card name Akstar and add it to your hand. So this card is pretty significant because it's the only card as of yet to actually target anything in your damage zone. So yeah, he targets one of the cards with an EX and then you get to re-trigger it. Now if you check the FAQ about this, Akstar's ability obviously is an entry ability, an auto ability, which means that can be cancelled. However, the EX Burst that he triggers is put onto the stack, but it is not considered either a summon or an auto ability, which means that you cannot cancel it through any means, I think, aside from being able to make it fizzle by making a forward you control untargetable. It becomes kind of hard to get rid of that ability. Obviously there's still plenty of ways to defend against it by making it so forwards don't receive damage or whatnot, but still it's a bit of an anomaly, but it's interesting nonetheless. So, Seymour, obviously, when Seymour enters the field, search for one summon and put it on top of your deck. So you play Seymour, you put 7-cost Odin on top of your deck, and then whenever you take damage, or you force yourself to take damage, you put it in the break zone, you can then play Akstar to then choose that 7-cost Odin. It doesn't have to be 7-cost Odin, but any summon with an EX, you can then play Akstar to then re-trigger that EX and hopefully kill 2 things. Leviathan as well, so draw 2 cards, then put 1 card from your hand on top or bottom of your deck. So it's again a good way to be able to, if you've got, say, a good EX Burst in hand, you don't want that, you play Leviathan, you put that EX Burst on top of your deck as you're about to take a point of damage, it goes to the break zone, or damage zone, sorry, and then you play Akstar to then re-trigger it as well. Now obviously Fusoya is an old way to be able to trigger dealing damage to yourself, but he does also deal 7,000 damage to one of your opponent's forwards as well, so it's not the worst thing in the world. Ultimately, you could, Akstar being a fire, you could put something fire on top of the deck, and then that triggers, that deals damage to maybe your opponent's board or just a forward's opponent, and then Fusoya maybe is able to finish it off. Borden, so now we're just talking about cards that would be good for EXs and good to be able to have on top of your deck or in the damage. Obviously, Thornton can search you any card, and that is a super good ability. So being able to play Akstar to search anything, really, really good. Obviously, at damage 3, he searches you an FFB character other than himself as well. So being able to play Akstar to search yourself 2 cards, one of which is whatever you want, that's awesome. Yojimbo. So if you read the FAQ, it says that it triggers its EX Burst. Yes, when Akstar enters the field, choose one card with EX Burst damage. You may trigger its EX Burst effect. So that does mean that Yojimbo will use it as if he is an EX Burst. So if Yojimbo results from an EX Burst, the former gains 3,000 power until the end of the turn instead, and then the forwards deal damage equal to its power to the other. So basically, you'll be getting the latter effect of Yojimbo, which is pretty good. Belias the Gigas. Now, Belias is a fantastic card because he gives plus 1,000 power haste first strike, and you get to draw a card. So again, at damage 3, that's pretty good because Akstar will be drawing you a card, and you also get to search something as well. But Akstar also then becomes a 9k haste first strike forward. Ouch. And you can just have this in mono fire. That's really good. Titan. So you play Akstar to trigger Titan, Akstar becomes a 10k forward, and you get to deal 10k something. That's just pretty good. In fire, there are plenty of ways to be able to give Akstar haste as well, so you could just, play Akstar onto the field, give him haste, you're away. Yasmat. So obviously he's an EX Burst with 3 options, so that's pretty good. So if you have a means of playing Akstar, or if you've just got multiple Akstar in your deck to keep on triggering different things, you can do it as you see fit. So choose one forward or cost 5 or more, break it, that's really, really good. Choose one monster, break it. There are a lot more monsters being played now, so being able to just flat out break a monster, probably useful. And then activate all the characters you control. So obviously you could pay the forward through your backups to be able to play Akstar onto the field. You get to reactivate all your backups, and again at damage 3, Akstar gets you a card to hand, which means you could then replay it because you've got all your backups back. Barrett. So obviously a 7 deck does use a lot of fire. So being able to re-trigger Barret whenever you play Akstar is really useful, and you know, he can search you 4 cards, sorry, not search you 4 cards, reveal the top 4 cards of your deck. You can get to put a 7 card back into your hand, and you can basically have a you can have a 7 fire earth 7 deck now, which is just Final Fantasy 7 cards. So if Akstar is like your only non-7 card, probably still worth it because there's so many EX bursts in a 7 earth fire deck. Une. So when you cast a summon, choose one forward you control, remove from the game, and then play the remove forward onto the field dull. This effect will only trigger during your turn and only once per turn. So no trying to use Akstar on your opponent's turn, unfortunately. So you could take point damage and then be like, oh, I'm going to use Akstar. No. So yes, obviously being able to cast just something small to then make Une flicker Akstar to then re-trigger an EX burst as well. And obviously all the EXs I've talked about before, really, really good. So being able to re-trigger those basically every turn is amazing. If you had something like Belias in the break zone and you were casting, I don't know, a little summon to dull out one of your opponent's forwards, you re-trigger to then have Akstar. So you could actually do it, you can do it during, any point in your turn. So you could attack with Akstar. Actually, no, you'd need to give him Brave first. No, actually, that wouldn't matter, would it? Sorry. You could attack with Akstar, hopefully deals opponent damage to your opponent, then you can cast a small summon, flicker in, bring in, I don't know, you could already have forward there that doesn't have haste, you could have Belias and give it haste and 1,000 pound first strike and draw your card, whatever. There's plenty of fantastic small summons to be able to play in both fire and ice to then keep on flickering Akstar to have lots of things happen. Zidane. So Zidane is a 4 CP 7k forward. Zidane cannot be chosen by your opponent's abilities. When your opponent discards a card from his or her hand due to your summons or abilities, choose one wind character, activate it. When Zidane attacks, your opponent reveals their hand. Select one forward from their hand, your opponent discards this card. So he's a bit more limited than the other Zidane that gets played a lot more, because he can only make your opponent discard a forward. But whenever your opponent discards a card, you get to reactivate a wind character. So if you've got plenty of discard, so you're playing wind ice, and you've got a wind character that can be dulled for lots of effects, then it's definitely worth it. So something like Baralai, these two are a match made in heaven. So when one or dull backups you control is activated, due to your summons or abilities, deal 3,000 damage to all the forwards your opponent controls. And when your opponent discards one or more cards from their hand due to your summons or abilities, choose one character, dull it and freeze it. So Zidane does both of those. He can make your opponent discard a card. Again, they does have to be a forward, but if you do make them discard a forward, you get to dull and freeze something, and you get to deal 3k damage to your opponent's board provided you reactivate something, or reactivate a dull backup even. Wow, that's pretty good. So Zidane effectively becomes a 10k attacker, and you've managed to dull and freeze something, and you've made your opponent discard a card. Ugh. So you do that along the lines of no, you get to reactivate 2 things on the attack, provided again you get to make your opponent discard a card. Which is then 6k dealt to your opponent's board just from one Zidane attack, and again dulling and freezing something out of the way, and you've made your opponent discard a card. Now obviously when you're reactivating something with Baralai states that the backup has to be activated from being dull. So you need to be able to have a backup that can constantly be dulled. So something like Chocobo is excellent. So if you attack with Zidane and you have no on the field, make your opponent discard a card, you can dull Chocobo, gains a counter, reactivates, dull her again through no, reactivates, dull her again to then get a card, and finally reactivates again. So you get 2 reactivations just from Zidane attacking, and provided Chocobo was already standing up, you can gain 2 counters and effectively draw a card. So you can make your opponent discard a card, you can dull and freeze one of the forwards, you can deal 6k damage to your opponent's forwards, and you can draw a card. Wow! Now, let's go a little bit further down the rabbit hole, shall we? Scale Toad. So obviously at the end of your opponent's turn, if your opponent has 2 cards or more in their hand, your opponent discards 1 card from their hand. So with Zidane on the field and Baralai on the field, and just go to end your turn, they go to end their turn. On their turn you get to dull and freeze something, and it's always more favourable to dull and freeze something in your opponent's turn because of the fact that they are going to have that whatever you dull and freeze out of action for 2 of their turns. So yeah, Zidane and Baralai in the field with Scale Toad, dull and freeze something at the end of their turn provided they have less than 2 cards, 1 card or 0 cards. Phew! Leviathan. So yeah, just when Zidane attacks, if your opponent does have a forward, just cast Leviathan, or have some means of bouncing a forward back to their hand. That way you know they've got a forward in hand for them to discard, at which point you then make them discard it. Glacier Labalus. So obviously you can just cast something like Glaz to make your opponent discard, at which point Zidane activates, or not activates, his ability triggers, sorry, and then you can activate something. You can activate Zidane if you want, but you can activate any wind character you control. Now, Aerith would be a good card to keep on reactivating because obviously you can pay 1 wind and dull her, choose 1 forward you control. You cannot, it cannot be chosen by opponent's summons or abilities this turn. Obviously, Zidane already has ability proof, but using Aerith means that he becomes summon proof as well, and you could also use Aerith to maybe protect your Baralai or something like that. What's also good is that, you know, there's plenty of Final Fantasy VII wind characters and also ice, so you could have Aerith dull, choose up to 3 category 7 characters other than Aerith, activate them. So you could actually keep on attacking, or you could attack with a Zidane and then use Aerith to reactivate some backups, use some other abilities. Then when Zidane makes your opponent discard a card, reactivate Aerith, then use her to reactivate some more. So basically you can reactivate even more things through this. Y'shtola. So really this is just talking about reactivating Y'shtola. You attack with Y'shtola, you attack with Zidane to then reactivate Y'shtola because she's a stupidly good card with, you know, she's got haste, but also she has a static minimum effect on herself, and she's really hard to kill, so she's an excellent blocker. Finally, Zemus. I really liked him as a card, but he doesn't get much play. He's just a bit too slow, really. 9 times out of 10, when Zemus comes down, he dies before he can do anything. But either way, he is a 4 CP 8k forward with pay X and dull. Choose 1 lightning forward in your break zone. If its cost is X, play it onto the field. You can only use this ability during your main phase. Now be careful because it states if its cost is X, not X or less. So you can't just pay X and say you paid 4 and then your opponent removes all the 4 CP forwards from your break zone. You can't then just choose a 3 CP forward. It has to be of the same cost. So, Lightning. Being able to play Lightning onto the field is interesting because of the fact that obviously she's tiny forward, so it doesn't matter that much. But if you are able to deal your opponent a point of damage, you can use Zemus to get Lightning to then Lightning can attack, and then at the end of the turn, Lightning comes back to hand. So it's a nice way to not only be able to recur CP to your hand, but also deal a point of damage to your opponent. And it's interesting because obviously you're paying the 2 CP to have Lightning come onto the field, but then she's coming to hand, and at the next turn, actually, obviously your backups will reactivate. So it's like you're kind of stockpiling CP in a way. Obviously you want to make sure that you don't put her back into hand and then you're over card limit, at which point you have to discard a card, so it's kind of pointless, but still it's a good way to be able to just kind of up your hand card size. Desh, so he has at damage 5, put Desh into the break zone, choose 1 forward, break it. So you can have Desh and Zemus on the field at damage 5, put Desh into the break zone, break a forward your opponent's controls, then use Zemus to bring him back on the field to then break another forward. Null. Choose 1 forward other than Null you control until the turn it gains plus 2000 power and haste, so that could be quite useful. You could have play something onto the field that you want attacking. You use Zemus to play Null, and you know Null would normally require 5 CP, but it doesn't matter this time. Or you can choose up to 2 forwards, deal them 2000 damage, and dull them. So if your opponent's got a couple of annoying blockers, you can use Zemus to effectively get rid of those forwards. What's good about Zemus as well is that he plays them onto the field active, so it's not like Phoenix where they have to come and dull. They can be active as well. So then on your opponent's turn, the forward he brings in will also be a blocker. But you could have, you know, a few forwards on your field, say 2 forwards and Zemus. You can use Zemus to bring in Null to get rid of some of your opponent's forwards, which you then may be able to push for game, or just give a forward that you need attacking haste. So yeah, pretty good. Ramza. When Ramza enters the field, choose 1 category FFT character other than card name Ramza in your break zone, add it to your hand, and at damage 5, when Ramza enters the field, you may play 1 category FFT character from your hand onto the field. So obviously, using Zemus, you would have to pay 5, but that does mean that Ramza comes onto the field, recurs a card back to your hand, and if you're at damage 5, plays it onto the field as well. So for paying 5, you're gaining 2 forwards. That's really good. Similar sort of thing with Noctis as well. When Noctis enters the field, choose 1 category 15 forward other than card name Noctis in your break zone, add it to your hand. So you could pay 3 for Noctis come onto the field, at which point you may be able to retrieve, say, Gladio from the break zone, to then play him for only 2 CP because you control a card named Noctis. Again, what's good about this as well is the fact that Zemus states a lightning forward, and even though Noctis is an earth forward, he's also a lightning forward, so therefore can be played by Zemus. Alba, when Alba enters the field or attacks, so choose one card in your opponent's break zone, remove it from the game, blah 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 blah. Don't care about the rest of that, because this is just a good way to be able to get rid of something from your opponent's break zone that you don't want there. Now obviously Zemus does state that you can only use this ability during your main phase, so you can't do it like mid-combat as a combat trick, or you can't even do it on your opponent's turn either, but still, you know there's something there, and you want it gone, get it gone by using Alba and Zemus. Man in Black, more recursion. So you cannot play Man in Black or card named Golbez while already in control of either character. So it says cannot play, so this literally means that if you have Golbez on the field, you can't play Man in Black even using Zemus. But what you can do is when Man in Black enters the field, choose one lightning summon of cost 3 or less in your break zone. You may cast it without paying the cost. If you do so, remove the summon from the game instead of using it into the break zone. So you pay 5 to get Man in Black, who is a 9 CP forward, so you know he's on curve, but then you also get to cast a summon, so probably something like Ramu, to deal 7k to an active forward in your opponent's field, and then you could also give Man in Black haste as well. Kane, continuing the 4th theme, he's just a really good 2 CP haste 9k forward, and when Kane enters the field from your hand, place 1 brainwashing counter on Kane. He's not entering from your hand because you're playing with Zemus from the break zone, so that's just awesome. There we go, everyone. What did you think of this week's video? I really like Zemus, actually. He's again like Alcid last week, where the longer this game goes on, the more cards he can play, and ultimately the better he can become, and he doesn't get much play anymore, so being able to put him into, maybe worm him into a deck, your opponent may not consider that, and he may become quite problematic for it. Also, there's been some big news in the FFTCG world recently. They're talking about Opus 15, or, you know, not Opus 15, because they are dispensing of the Opus subtitle, so the next set will be called Crystal Dominion. And they're also talking about a new kind of token crystal card, which will be interesting. We'll have to wait to see how they implement that, but sounds similar and also not similar to the way counters work in this game. But either way, I'm always up for new mechanics. I think they're a lot of fun. Anyway, stay safe everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.